It was really cool to kind of start the service a few minutes late this morning, as people were sitting out in the foyer, sipping a cup of coffee and staring at our beautiful, bright, vibrant window, or at least where the bright, vibrant window was last week. If you weren't here last week, we had a beautifully air-conditioned foyer. We also had leaves. It was an interesting experience to walk into the church, and my first thought was, well, there shouldn't be leaves on the carpet. Which, duh, I guess. But then it was that moment that everyone had, and I watched every single person who came into the church last week have the same reaction of, why does it look different in here? Why does it feel different in here? And then they'd look up and they'd see a big empty spot where that beautiful plate glass window had been. For those of you that don't know, we have been kind of in process with Well and Glass. We noticed that in the spring there seemed to be a rhythmic thump, 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 thump. And we noticed that ever so slightly, that giant plate glass window was being moved in the wind, was bowing in and bowing out, and we got Well and Glass to come out and take a look at it, and they said, well, we can't really tell unless we dig into it, and it looks like it's fine. It looks like everything's okay, and we can probably just get some reinforcements put in, and we'll put you in the queue for that. That was in the spring, and supply chain issues being what they are, it's fine. We left it and we sat there and we wondered, how are we going to do this? They quoted us that this window was going to cost the church $11,000 at a minimum to get up and reinforce it, to build the scaffolding, to have 2 guys out here every day for at least 3 days to do the full-on repair. It was going to cost about $11,000, and that's assuming that everything went exactly as it looked like it was going to go from the outside. Now, that's fine, because it is what it is, and you have to wait until you walk in one day and there's simply no window there anymore. We had, we're great. I'm grateful to have a diligent and active board of managers here at the church who immediately were making phone calls, and we're spending hours well beyond their volunteer limit here at the church trying to call anybody that would come and put a tarp up. We were talking about maybe going to Home Depot and buying just all the tarps and hanging them. Maybe we'd have to buy plywood and frame something up ourselves, and finally got a hold of First General, who was able to come out and decided to frame up a wall there for the time being. And we met with the insurance adjuster, and they told us that it was absolutely the right thing to do, and so we were kind of glad to hear that at least. And then the insurance adjuster said a couple of things that really surprised us. One, she said, we can't believe that there's no water damage, because for all the rain that was blowing, for all the wind that was hammering down on the window, enough to shake it loose from its foundation, there was no water in the church, which meant our deductible was 25% of what it would have been otherwise. 2, that the glass fell outwards instead of inwards, so we could still continue to worship here on Sunday morning just exactly as we had. Maybe we kept our jackets on. But 3, the insurance is going to, it looks like they're going to pay for the entire cost of the replacement of the window, which is, that's not even the best part yet. Applause is good, but that's not, save your applause for the best part. The reality is that, the timeline was, one Sunday I stood up here and told you that we were going to have to cut about $10,000 out of our budget. And the next Sunday I came in and there was no window. And I was supposed to talk to you about God's faithfulness and the habit of faithfulness. And all I could think was, this sucks. This is just full of suck. I think all of us on the board were asking the same question. They were, how do we pay a $10,000 deductible when we're already needing to cut $10,000 and we're not sure how we're going to even pay for, we weren't sure how we were going to pay for the $11,000 possible floor level of the repair. Then these are the challenges that we deal with as a church, and we're not trying to, in the interest of transparency, and I'm going to bring this back to the passage in a second here, but it's important that you understand this. I stood here one Sunday and I told you about the need to believe that God has a bigger plan for us as a church, that God is doing something in with and through the ministry of Chippawa Presbyterian Church. Then I stood up here and I told you about God's faithfulness. And today I'm supposed to stand up here and tell you about God's self-control and the divine impulse for self-control. All of these things are connected. This is not a mistake, and this is not a happy accident that this has happened in this order. If anything, this is God deliberately, like Biff in Back to the Future. Hello, McFly. You need to get this through your head. This is a reminder of the way that God's faithfulness takes care of God's church to the end of God's goodness. God's goodness is the result of what happens when the church is faithful and diligent, because even as I stood up here and I told you about God's utter faithfulness, that God trusts us to go and carry out God's mission, that we can trust God to take care of us in all of the other ways. I was standing up here and telling you that, while at the same time wondering how on earth is God going to take care of us for this window. And then we got the 3 check marks from the adjuster. There was miraculously no water damage anywhere in the building. So it was just a wind claim, which meant that our deductible was 1/4 of what it could have been. The entire cost of repairing the window has now been completely evaporated and absorbed by the insurance company. And 3, we get to as a congregation start to have a conversation about redesigning and reimagining what the window and space can be. We get to not only have exactly what we want, but we get to do it without paying a dime out of our pockets. This is God's faithfulness in action. This is what faithfulness looks like. It's showing up and saying, I have no idea how I'm going to preach this and not feel like a hypocrite. And God says, you know what? I got this. I got this so you don't have to sound like a hypocrite. It's God showing up for his church over and over and over again. And so why am I telling you all of this? I mean, one, because it's a good story, and we should be all about good stories. But 2, faithfulness is the key to understanding self-control. Faithfulness is the key to understanding self-control, because self-control doesn't make sense from an evolutionary standpoint, right? From an evolutionary standpoint, like we're told that our job is to consume as much as possible, because there will be good times and there will be lean times. Our brains are simply not evolved for a world of plenty and excess in the way that we have it. The way our brains are wired, it's consume. But somewhere in deep in our subconscious, there's that fundamental primordial lie that's still being whispered into our ear, that was whispered into the ear by the serpent to Adam and to the man in the Garden of Eden, that did God really say, don't eat of that tree? Did God really say that there was one tree that was off limits, that there was one thing that you couldn't have? Because the subtext of that promise, the subtext of that lie, that serpent's primordial lie was, has God really said he's going to take care of you all the way through? Has God really said he's going to be faithful to the end? Because what happens when fall comes and those berries over there aren't blossoming, but that one tree still has ripe fruit on it? Shouldn't you take it and eat it? Isn't taking it and eating it really the prudent thing to do here, because you don't know what the next day is going to hold? The fundamental lie, the primordial lie, at the core of all human suffering, at the core of all human longing, is that we do not believe God is going to take care of us. And so we overindulge. We consume too much of good things, and it leads us into bad places. The problem with good things is not that they are somehow good or bad. In fact, God looked at everything that he made and said it is good. It is, in Hebrew, tov. It has a purpose and a plan behind it. There is a reason for everything that God has made. Wine is meant to foster celebration, but wine overindulged leads to alcoholism. Sex is meant to be good and pleasurable and fun, but sex taken to the wrong thing hurts not only yourself, but your relationship with other people. Money is good, stuff is good, but stuff overindulged creates a barrier between me and you. The reality of everything in our life that is created is that it was created good, and it was created to be used for a purpose, but when we overindulge in that thing, we risk breaking it. Self-control is about choosing what you want most over what you want in the moment. In the moment, you can want any number of things, and that's fine, and those are good desires, and those good desires were put in you by a good God who loves you and wants you to be fulfilled in your life in every way, shape, and form. We are called and invited to worship God with our mind, heart, soul, and strength. Our entire being, our entire existence is called into relationship with God. But that invites us to hear Paul's argument. If our entire being is called into relationship with God, then we have a duty not just to take the good things and overindulge them, but to take the good things that God has surrounded us with and use them for their maximum potential. When I was in undergrad, I had this economics professor who was teaching Economics 101. And he had just come back from doing a fellowship working with the Bank of Canada, brilliant economist, a masterful understanding of the full dynamics of macroeconomic theory, and could not teach his way out of a paper bag. It's an intro to economics class, and the first semester, I don't know if anyone passed the final. I'm pretty sure they ended up grading everything on a curve, because if they just let everybody take a D- on the course, it would have looked bad for him, I guess. And so January we come back. It's the second half of the course. We're looking at macroeconomics this time, and he puts out a question to the class and says, "Who can name me a person that's won the Nobel Prize in economics?" And there are no hands that go up anywhere in the classroom. But me, thinking that I was clever, I had just watched A Beautiful Mind that weekend. And so I put up my hand and I said, "Didn't John Nash win a Nobel Prize?" And he said, "No, that was math. But it's close enough, and you're the only person who put up your hand. So Jared, you come down here." And he pointed to somebody else and said, "You, take notes for Jared." Which, those are the best notes I got all semester. And he sat me down at a table in front of the class, and he put down a box of 24 Tim Hortons donuts in front of me. And I said, "Great, I've been training for this my entire life. This is perfect." And he said, "I want you to eat a donut." I said, "Okay, I know how to do this one." So I ate a donut. He said, out of 10, what would you give that donut?" I said, 10 out of 10, no question. He said, "Okay." So he wrote 10 out of 10 on the board, and then he started to lecture. A few minutes later, he came back to me and said, "Jared, eat another donut." I said, "Okay." So I ate another donut. My teeth started to feel a little funny, but that's fine. He said, "Rate that donut." I said, "Like an 8, I guess. It was fine. It was a good donut." And so I said, "Okay," wrote an 8 on the board and kept back to teaching. A few minutes later, he came back again and again and again throughout the entire class, forcing me to eat donuts well beyond the point where I didn't want to eat a donut anymore. And by the time that the exact same donut that I'd rated a 10 out of 10 with at the beginning of the class felt like a negative score by the end. I felt sick, off, and just generally miserable. I really wanted to go home and have a nap. And all of this was to teach us something about marginal something or other, economics. Yeah, see, you all took economics. You know how it is. It was testing you. And the reality of what this kind of reminds me of, as I think about this story in my own life, is that there are good things in this world, and my spirit, my desire, my heart, my gut, whatever part of it you want, whatever name you want to give it, that drives your impulses, wants to take the good things way too far. And for me, it's food. For me, it is 100% food. I have always struggled to limit myself to a reasonable amount of food in a given sitting. And this is a trait I think I've passed on to my kids. But we all have these things in our life that invite us to consider both the moment and the most, and which thing we're going to prioritize at that point in time. Are we going to prioritize the most, or are we going to prioritize the moment? Because whichever one we choose is going to somehow impact our story going forward. Little by little, we're wiring our brain to remember and learn and remind ourselves that when we choose the moment or when we choose the most, we're putting a priority on something. We're training neural pathways, to use the correct terminology for it. We're creating neural pathways of behavior that prioritize most or prioritize moments. And the reality is that excess just might not be the blessing that we think it is. You can have too much of anything. Too much water will flush all the necessary sodium out of your body. Too much oxygen will literally burn your lungs from the inside out. The most basic things in the world are meant to be used in their appropriate quantities. And so the problems of our world are not problems of lack. Last year, maybe last year's a bad example, in 2019, the world's caloric output was enough to feed the entire population a sustainable diet of 1,500 calories per day and still have half as much left over again. We could feed every single man, woman, and child on planet Earth and still have half over left again. And yet we threw away, on average, more than 300 days worth of caloric food per person living in Canada alone. The problems that face our world are not problems of lack, they are problems of excess. And the reality that we contend with, the reality that we speak into, is that as a church, we participate in that as much as anyone else. We Christians do not throw away less food. We do not spend less frivolously. We do not give more away to charity in a significant amount than non-Christians do. We are just like everybody else in this area. And that's why Paul writes to the church in Corinth and says, what if we were different? What if we treated ourselves like athletes competing in a race? What if we treated ourselves like a finely tuned Ferrari that needed to be carefully maintained and watched and pursued? Because all of these things tie back to what Paul is trying to do. It always comes back to the mission for Paul. He says, I'm limiting myself in what I eat and around who I eat and how I talk to them and what I do because I'm trying to tell them a story. It's a story of God's faithfulness. That even when I choose not to eat too much meat, even when I choose not to drink too much wine, even when I choose not to go to the places that I am free to go to, God still takes care of me. God's faithfulness remains on display. So how do we look at this as a habit? How do we look at this through the lens of our habit cycle? The author Amy Krauss Rosenthal says that we should pay attention to what we pay attention to. Because when you feel full, that should be your cue. And it doesn't have to be food. It can be alcohol, it can be spending, it can be ignoring people, it can be anything that you do that fills up some kind of an emptiness inside of you. There are 1,000,001 ways that we treat the emptiness inside of us. Some of us, it is with drugs or alcohol or food or sex or money or spending or debt or habit or hobby or something else. Whatever fills up that emptiness, pay attention. Pay attention to what you feel, where you are when you feel full. Where you are, because where you are when you feel full lets you then take note. You know, the three most important things a realtor will tell you: location, location, location. Where you are when you feel full tells you what your indulgences are. It tells you where you are prioritizing most over more, or most over moment, rather. And when you notice it, just write it down. If you have your phone in your back pocket, open up a notes app and write down where you were when you feel full. If you carry a journal with you, find a blank page and just make a note of where you were when you feel full. Because location, location, location will eventually start to tell you a story of where you go to treat that emptiness inside of you and what's causing the emptiness inside of you. Finally, the reward is a happier relationship, a happier, healthier relationship with the image of God. Because that's what you are. You carry the image of God, not just on the outside, but on the inside. When God made you, He stamped His seal of approval on you, and it is what we celebrate when we celebrate baptism. Baptism is the seal and approval of God, of the divine creator on every single person who bears His image. And so when we have a happier, healthier, more holistic relationship with the stuff that God has made, including ourselves, we find ourselves with a happier, healthy relationship with the one who made us too. This is what self-control does. Self-control invites us into a story of God's faithfulness, a story pulled out of each one of us. And God will continue to pull it out of you over and over and over again until we get the message. Glory be to the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.